If inflation stays at 3%, instead of the 2% your financial advisor may have promised you in the financial plan, you don't just lose 1% of your money. Over a 20-year retirement, that tiny, quote unquote, 1% difference, that minor rounding error, that's going to delete almost 20% of your purchasing power. That means if you retired with $1 million, let's say, that 3% trap, it quietly eroded about $180,000 of your real purchasing power over 20 years while you were sleeping. Look, if looking at retirement in this way is helpful, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next retirement assumption that we're going to test together. And by the way, leave a comment. What's your favorite way? What do you do in your family to combat the impact of inflation on your retirement plan? Today, we're going to find your real retirement number. We're going to work on stopping the leak. And we're going to talk about, at the end of the video, what are the 4 assets that you can own that the government cannot print away to ensure your long-term independence. So yesterday, I spent something doing that most folks would find boring and tedious. I'm auditing my bills from 2021 against today's prices. Look, I'm not a financial guru. I'm a risk manager, if you will, of my own retirement plan. I'm looking at the same CPI charts that you are, and I'm realizing that the official numbers, they don't match the reality of anyone living in today's real world. So a lot of folks will say you need $1 million. They're wrong. You don't need a number. You need an independence floor. Let's give you an example. If inflation stays at 3%, the 4% rule, that rule as far as how much money you can take out of your portfolio, it's officially dead. If you take 4% out and inflation takes 3% out, you do the math on how much purchasing power you are losing. I know you've heard this before, but hope is not a strategy. An active retirement is an involved retirement. You have plans for different scenarios. You don't just wish for 2% inflation. You prepare for 4%. The most tactical shift that you can make is variable spending ceiling. In years when inflation spikes, you don't just hope the market recovers. You adjust. You categorize spending into needs and flexible wants. When the wealth leak gets too big, you cap the wants to protect the principal. Why? This keeps you in control. It keeps you independent. So before we look at assets, let's talk about the Liquidity Financial Shield. This is your emergency fund. In an inflationary environment, unplanned expenses like a roof repair or a medical copay, they don't just cost more, they threaten your investment strategy. So without a robust cash reserve, a single bad inflation year might force you to sell stocks or bonds when the market is down, just to pay for a broken water heater. That's how retirees lose their independence. Your emergency fund, it allows you to be patient. It's that patience fund that lets you work your way through market fluctuations, wait out high inflation cycles without being forced to liquidate your long-term assets at a loss. Look, you can't stop the Federal Reserve from printing money. It's a whole different video we'll do another day. But you can own things that they can't touch. Here's asset number 1. A paid-off home. It's the ultimate inflation shield. When you own your home outright, you have prepaid 30 years of your life's largest expense at yesterday's prices. You aren't just saving money, you're opting out of the rental market's inflation entirely. Look, I know it's going to get a lot of comments about renting versus ownership, but the stability that a paid off home gets you, right? That emotional, that mental security, pretty hard to beat. Here's asset number 2. Look for and do some homework on I-bonds and TIPS, T-I-P-S. Look, these aren't fancy, all right? You won't see a lot of brochures on this, but they're honest. I bonds, for example, they're U.S. Treasury securities where the interest rate is a combination of a fixed rate and an inflation rate. They blend together. When inflation spikes, your interest rate goes along with it. How about TIPS? Treasury Inflation Protected Security. You can see why they call it TIPS. These are bonds where the principal value increases with inflation. So for example, if you hold a $10,000 TIPS and inflation is 3%, your principal becomes $10,300. You're not just earning interest, your actual wealth is growing, right? Trying to keep up pace with the cost of living. Here's asset number 3. What about a rental property if you've got one or are thinking about one? Rental property is a dual threat inflation fighter. First, the value of the building, generally, understand that, rises with the cost of materials, labor, market. Second, you can also adjust the rent. As the dollar loses value, you charge more nominal dollars for the same square footage. It's a self-adjusting income stream that maintains your independence regardless of the currency devaluation. All right, here's asset number 4. Of course, we have to talk about equities, right? The market. Cash in an account, right, is like a melting ice cube. But there are some companies out there whose stocks you can own. They can fight inflation because they have pricing power, right? You've got stable and value stocks. Think utilities and healthcare. When their costs go up, they raise their prices because their customers, unfortunately, have no choice but to pay. Another video, right? They're the bedrock kind of equities. You have dividends. Companies that increase their dividends for over 25 years. These dividends, in some cases, will grow faster than the 3% inflation rate, giving you a little raise every year, right? Plus the equity gain you may get in those stocks. How about growth stocks? Riskier, yes, absolutely. But growth stocks allow your capital to outpace inflation over the long term. If inflation is 3%, but your index grows at 8, you're gaining 5 in real wealth. Now, the most expensive thing you will ever buy in retirement, hands down, no question, is a nursing home bed. Inflation hits this service sector, nurses, caregivers, facilities, the absolute hardest. If you want to inflation-proof your life, you have to stay out of what I call the dependency trap. Every mile you walk, every weight you lift, every healthy meal you eat is a deposit into your, let's name it, your assisted living avoidance fund. At a 3% inflation, do the math, a $6,000 monthly care bill today, and quite frankly, that's a pretty conservative number, will be almost $10,000 in 15 years. Guess what? You can't out-invest that. You've got to outlive it through physical independence. Now, we need to stop asking about how much do I need, right? In terms of this big lump sum bucket at the end of the rainbow. You've got to start asking, how much of my independence am I willing to lose? You can fall into the dependency trap and watch your purchasing power continue to melt until you have to hand over your independence to family or a state-run facility for healthcare, for example. Or you can choose the independent retirement. You manage the risks, you own the assets, you take charge of protecting your health. Look, we don't manage money. We manage the risks that take the money away. So the math is changing, but your goal, it hasn't. You want to remain independent. You want to remain funded. All right, by the way, this content is educational only, not medical, legal, tax, or financial advice. I'm not giving you any personalized recommendations. Go consult a qualified professional. And please note, the comments below, those are individual opinions and they are not mine.